When nurse Rachel Martinez was escorted out of Desert Valley Medical Center for treating a homeless veteran against hospital policy, she thought her career was over. But 24 hours later, something happened that no one saw coming. A full Marine battalion appeared at the hospital doors, and what they revealed about Rachel's past changed everything. This is a story about courage, sacrifice, and the bonds that can never be broken. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead in the emergency department of Desert Valley Medical Center as Rachel Martinez finished her third double shift this week. Her scrubs were wrinkled, her dark hair pulled back in a messy bun that had seen better days, and her feet ached in shoes that had walked countless miles through hospital corridors. The Phoenix heat outside was unforgiving even at 9 in the evening, but inside the sterile walls of the ER, the air conditioning provided little comfort for the exhaustion that had settled deep in her bones. Rachel had been a nurse at Desert Valley for 3 years, ever since moving to Phoenix with her 16-year-old son Tyler after her divorce. She wasn't the most popular nurse among the administration, mainly because she had a habit of bending rules when it came to patient care. While other nurses focused on protocols and paperwork, Rachel focused on people. She saw past the insurance, cards and payment methods, past the hospital's bottom line, and straight to the human being who needed help. That's exactly what got her in trouble on this particular Friday night. She was restocking supplies in Trauma Bay 3 when the commotion started near the main entrance. Raised voices, the sound of security radios crackling, and the familiar tension that filled the air when someone unwanted tried to enter the hospital. Rachel glanced through the window and saw them, 2 security guards flanking a man who was clearly struggling to stay upright. The man was perhaps 50 years old, though the streets had aged him beyond his years. His clothes were layers of mismatched fabric, torn and stained from too many nights sleeping rough. His beard was unkempt, his hair matted, and even from a distance Rachel could see the way he favored his left side, suggesting some kind of injury. But what caught her attention most were his eyes, alert, aware, and filled with a pain that went deeper than physical hurt. "Sir, you need to leave the premises," one of the guards was saying, his voice loud enough to carry through the emergency department. "This is a private facility. If you can't pay for treatment, you need to go to the county hospital." The man swayed slightly, pressing his hand against his ribs. "Please," he said, his voice hoarse but steady. "I think something's broken. I just need someone to look at it." Rachel felt something twist in her chest. She'd seen this scene play out too many times before. Desert Valley Medical Center was a for-profit hospital in one of Phoenix's more affluent neighborhoods, and they had strict policies about treating uninsured patients. The county hospital was 15 miles away, and in his condition, this man might not make it there. Dr. Harrison, the night shift administrator, appeared at the security guard's shoulders. He was a thin man in his 50s with silver hair and wire-rimmed glasses, wearing a crisp white coat that never seemed to get dirty. His expression was one of barely concealed irritation as he looked at the homeless man. "What's the situation here?" Dr. Harrison asked the guards, not bothering to address the man directly. "Homeless individual requesting medical treatment," the first guard replied. "No insurance, no means of payment. We're escorting him off the property." Dr. Harrison nodded curtly. "Good. Make sure he understands he's not welcome back. We can't have these people thinking they can just walk in here whenever they want." Rachel watched from the trauma bay as they prepared to escort the man outside. She saw the way he stumbled, the grimace of pain that crossed his face, the resignation in his shoulders as he accepted what was happening to him. But she also saw something else, something in the way he held himself, despite his condition. There was a dignity there, a strength that spoke of someone who had once stood tall and proud. Without thinking, Rachel stepped out of the trauma bay and walked toward the group. "Excuse me," she said, her voice calm but firm. "What seems to be the problem?" Dr. Harrison turned to her with barely concealed annoyance. "Martinez, this doesn't concern you. Please return to your duties." But Rachel was already looking at the homeless man, making eye contact in a way that none of the others had bothered to do. "Sir, are you hurt?" The man straightened slightly, surprised that someone was actually speaking to him directly. "Yes, ma'am. Think I might have busted some ribs when I fell. Been hurting for 2 days now." Rachel could see the professional assessment already forming in her mind. Potential broken ribs, possibly internal bleeding, definitely dehydration and malnutrition. This man needed medical attention, not a security escort. "Martinez," Dr. Harrison's voice carried a warning tone. "Step away from the situation. This individual cannot receive treatment here." Rachel looked at Dr. Harrison, then back at the man. She thought about the oath she'd taken as a nurse, about the promise to care for all patients, regardless of their circumstances. She thought about her own son, Tyler, and how she'd want someone to treat him if he were hurt and alone. And somewhere, in a place deeper than conscious thought, she thought about other men she'd once known who had served their country and found themselves forgotten by the very nation they'd protected. "What's your name?" she asked the man softly. "Marcus," he replied. "Marcus Johnson. Marcus, I'm Rachel. I'm a nurse here. Would you like me to take a look at those ribs?" Dr. Harrison stepped forward immediately. "Martinez, you are absolutely not to treat this individual. That is a direct order." Rachel never took her eyes off Marcus. She saw something flash across his face when she'd introduced herself, a flicker of recognition, not of her personally, but of something familiar in her manner. Her bearing, the way she spoke to him with respect rather than pity. "Ma'am," Marcus said quietly, "you don't need to get in trouble on my account." But Rachel was already moving, gently taking his arm to guide him toward the trauma bay. "Come on, Marcus. Let's get you looked at." "Martinez!" Dr. Harrison's voice was sharp now, carrying the full weight of his authority. "Stop right there. If you take one more step with that man, you will be suspended immediately." Rachel paused at the threshold of the trauma bay. The entire emergency department had gone quiet, nurses and orderlies stopping their work to watch the confrontation unfold. She could feel the weight of their stares, the tension in the air, the knowledge that her next decision would have consequences that went far beyond this moment. She looked at Marcus, saw the pain in his eyes, the way he was trying not to lean on her for support even though he clearly needed it. She thought about her job, her son's college fund, the mortgage on their small apartment. She thought about everything she had to lose. Then she thought about everything Marcus had already lost, and everything she stood to lose in terms of her own integrity if she walked away. "Come on, Marcus," she said quietly, helping him into the trauma bay. "Let's take care of you." Dr. Harrison's face flushed red with anger. "Martinez, you are suspended effective immediately. Security, escort her off the premises as soon as she's finished with whatever unauthorized treatment she thinks she's providing." Rachel didn't respond. She was already helping Marcus onto the examination table, her training taking over as she began a preliminary assessment. His breathing was shallow, suggesting possible punctured lung. His skin was pale and clammy. His pulse was elevated. Whatever had happened to him, it was serious enough that delaying treatment could be life-threatening. As she worked, Rachel found herself talking to Marcus in the calm, steady voice she'd perfected over years of treating patients in high-stress situations. "Tell me about the fall, Marcus. When did it happen?" "2 nights ago," he replied, wincing, as she gently palpated his ribs. "Lost my balance coming down some stairs behind the old courthouse, hit the railing on my way down." Rachel nodded, continuing her examination. She could feel several ribs that were clearly broken, and there was significant bruising along his left side. "Marcus, have you ever served in the military?" The question seemed to surprise him. He looked at her more carefully, studying her face. "Yes, ma'am. Marines, 2 tours in Afghanistan." Rachel felt something click into place, a recognition that went beyond the professional. "What unit?" "2nd Battalion, 8th Marines. Why do you ask?" Rachel continued working, but her hands were steadier now, her movements more purposeful. "Just curious. I've worked with military personnel before." She didn't elaborate, but something in her tone made Marcus look at her differently. There was a familiarity in the way she moved, the efficiency of her examination, the respect with which she treated him. It reminded him of the medics he'd known in Afghanistan, the ones who had risked everything to take care of their brothers in arms. "Ma'am," he said quietly, "you really don't need to risk your job for me." Rachel met his eyes as she prepared to take his vital signs. "Marcus, you served your country. You put your life on the line for people you'd never met. The least I can do is make sure you get the medical care you need." Dr. Harrison appeared in the doorway of the trauma bay, his face a mask of barely controlled fury. "Martinez, you have 30 seconds to step away from that patient, or security will physically remove you from this hospital." Rachel didn't look up from her work. She was drawing blood for testing, her movements precise and professional. "I need to run some tests to check for internal bleeding. His injuries are more serious than they initially appeared." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "I don't care if he's bleeding to death," Dr. Harrison snapped. "This hospital has policies, and you are violating every single one of them. You're fired, Martinez. Effective immediately. Finish whatever you're doing and get out." The words hit Rachel like a physical blow, but she didn't stop working. She'd known this was likely to happen the moment she'd made her choice, but hearing it made it real. 3 years of employment gone. Her steady income gone. Her health insurance gone. Everything she'd built for herself and Tyler in Phoenix suddenly uncertain. But as she looked at Marcus, saw the way he was breathing easier now that she'd given him something for the pain, saw the gratitude in his eyes despite his obvious concern for what her kindness was costing her, she knew she'd made the right choice. "The blood work will take about 20 minutes, she told Marcus quietly. "I'm going to make sure the lab processes it as a priority, and I'll have Dr. Chen look at your x-rays. She's good people." Marcus reached out and gently touched her arm. "Ma'am, what you've done for me, I won't forget it. Ever." Rachel smiled, the first genuine smile she'd managed all day. "You take care of yourself, Marcus, and thank you for your service." As she walked out of the trauma bay, she saw the other nurses watching her with a mixture of admiration and disbelief. Dr. Harrison was already on his phone, presumably calling security to make sure she was escorted off the property. The fluorescent lights seemed harsher now, the familiar sounds of the emergency department already feeling like they belonged to someone else's life. Rachel gathered her personal belongings from her locker, her hands steady despite the magnitude of what had just happened. She thought about calling Tyler, about explaining to her 16-year-old son that she'd just lost her job because she'd chosen to help someone who couldn't help himself. She thought about the bills that would come due, the rent that would still need to be paid, the uncertain future that stretched ahead of them. But she also thought about Marcus, about the way he'd straightened up when she'd treated him with dignity instead of dismissal. She thought about the other veterans she'd encountered over the years, the ones who'd fallen through the cracks of a system that had promised to take care of them. She thought about the oath she'd taken, the promise to do no harm, to care for those who needed caring for, As security escorted her to the parking lot, Rachel walked with her head high. She'd lost her job, but she'd kept her integrity. She'd lost her financial security, but she'd gained something more valuable: the knowledge that when faced with a choice between doing what was easy and doing what was right, she'd chosen correctly. The Phoenix night air was still warm, carrying the scent of desert sage and distant rain. Rachel sat in her car for a moment before starting the engine, looking back at the hospital where she'd worked for 3 years, where she'd saved lives and made a difference and built what she'd thought was a secure future for herself and her son. Tomorrow, she'd have to figure out what came next. Tomorrow, she'd have to start looking for a new job, explaining to potential employers why she'd been fired, rebuilding everything she'd just lost. Tomorrow, she'd have to tell Tyler that their carefully planned life had just taken an unexpected turn. But tonight, somewhere in that hospital, Marcus Johnson was receiving the medical care he needed. Tonight, a veteran who had served his country with honor was being treated with the dignity he deserved. Tonight, she'd made a choice that mattered. Rachel started her car and drove home through the quiet streets of Phoenix, not knowing that in less than 24 hours, everything would change again, not knowing that the choice she'd made in that trauma bay would ripple outward in ways she couldn't imagine, touching lives and awakening loyalties she'd thought were buried in the past. Not knowing that sometimes, when you stand up for what's right, the people you've stood up for in the past come back to stand up for you. Rachel's apartment was quiet when she finally made it home, the kind of silence that felt heavy with unspoken worry. Tyler was already asleep, his textbooks scattered across the kitchen table where he'd been doing homework. She stood in the doorway, for a moment, watching her son's peaceful face in the dim light from the hallway, knowing that tomorrow she'd have to shatter the comfortable routine they'd built together. The next morning came too quickly. Rachel had barely slept, her mind racing through possible explanations, backup plans, and the daunting prospect of job hunting in a market where being fired from your previous position was a scarlet letter. She made coffee with shaking hands, the familiar routine feeling foreign now that everything else had changed. Tyler emerged from his bedroom at 7:30, already dressed for school in his Phoenix Union High School t-shirt and jeans. At 16, he was tall like his father, but had inherited Rachel's determined chin and steady gaze. He grabbed a piece of toast and was halfway to the door when he noticed his mother sitting at the kitchen table, still in her pajamas, staring into her coffee cup. "Mom, don't you have to be at work?" Tyler paused, his backpack slung over one shoulder, keys jingling in his hand. Rachel looked up, trying to arrange her features into something resembling normalcy. "I need to talk to you about something, sweetheart. Sit down for a minute." The concern that immediately clouded Tyler's face made Rachel's heart ache. Her son had already been through enough upheaval in his young life. The divorce, the move to Phoenix, the adjustment to a new school and new friends. The last thing she wanted was to add more uncertainty to his world. "What's wrong?" Tyler dropped his backpack and slid into the chair across from her, his breakfast forgotten. Rachel took a deep breath. "I lost my job yesterday." The words hung in the air between them. Tyler's eyes widened, and she could see him processing the implications, the rent, his college savings, the stability they'd worked so hard to build. "What happened?" His voice was steady, but Rachel could hear the worry underneath. She told him the truth, or at least the simplified version. A patient had needed help. The hospital had policies against treating him. She'd made a choice to provide care anyway. She didn't mention that the patient was homeless, didn't go into the details of the confrontation with Dr. Harrison, didn't explain the deeper reasons why she'd felt compelled to help Marcus Johnson. Tyler listened without interrupting, his expression growing more serious with each word. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment, turning his coffee mug in slow circles on the table. "So, you got fired for helping someone," he said finally. "That's one way to put it." Tyler nodded slowly. "Good." Rachel blinked, certain she'd misheard. "Good?" "Mom, you taught me that doing the right thing isn't always easy, and it's not always rewarded. But it's still the right thing." Tyler reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "I'm proud of you." The simple words hit Rachel harder than all of Dr. Harrison's threats had. She felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes, overwhelmed by the maturity and compassion of this boy she'd raised, this young man who understood instinctively what some adults never grasped. "We'll figure it out," Tyler continued. "I can pick up more shifts at the restaurant and you'll find another job. Maybe one where they don't punish you for being a decent human being." Rachel squeezed his hand back, marveling at how quickly he'd shifted from worried teenager to problem-solving partner. "Tyler, your job is to focus on school. I'll handle the finances. We're a team, Mom. We always have been." After Tyler left for school, Rachel sat alone in the quiet apartment, trying to summon the energy to begin the process of rebuilding her professional life. She opened her laptop and stared at the blank job search pages, wondering how to explain, in a cover letter, that she'd been terminated for putting patient care above hospital policy. Her phone rang just before 9 o'clock. The caller ID showed a number she didn't recognize, but the area code was local. "Hello, Ms. Martinez? This is Dr. Sarah Chen from Desert Valley Medical Center. I was wondering if we could meet for coffee this morning." Rachel recognized the name. Dr. Chen was one of the emergency physicians she'd worked with occasionally, a sharp and compassionate doctor who had a reputation for putting patients first. "Dr. Chen, if this is about yesterday, I should probably tell you that I was terminated." "I know. That's exactly why I want to talk to you. Can you meet me at that little cafe on Camelback Road in an hour?" An hour later, Rachel sat across from Dr. Chen in a booth at Desert Bloom Cafe, a small coffee shop that was a popular spot for medical professionals to decompress between shifts. Dr. Chen was a petite woman in her early 40s, with intelligent eyes and graying temples that she made no effort to hide. She'd ordered black coffee and sat forward with her elbows on the table, her expression serious. "What you did yesterday was remarkable," Dr. Chen said without preamble, "and completely insane." Rachel managed a weak smile. "That seems to be the consensus." "Marcus Johnson," Dr. Chen continued, "had 3 broken ribs, a punctured lung, and internal bleeding that would have killed him if he'd waited much longer for treatment. Your assessment was spot on, and your decision to treat him despite Harrison's orders probably saved his life." "How is he?" "Stable. We had to do emergency surgery to repair the internal bleeding, but he's going to be fine. He's been asking about you." Rachel felt a rush of relief that surprised her with its intensity. "I'm glad he's okay." Dr. Chen leaned back, studying Rachel's face. "Marcus told me something interesting while I was checking on him this morning. He said you moved like military medical personnel, said you reminded him of the medics he knew in Afghanistan." Rachel kept her expression neutral, but something in her chest tightened. "Did he?" "Rachel, I've been practicing emergency medicine for 15 years. I've worked with enough former military medics to recognize the signs. The way you assessed him, the efficiency of your movements, the way you talked to him, it wasn't just nursing training." The silence stretched between them. Rachel thought about deflecting, making up a story about having worked with veterans or having received additional trauma training. But Dr. Chen's eyes were kind, and Rachel was tired of carrying the weight of her past alone. "Army medic," she said quietly. 3 tours in Afghanistan, 82nd Airborne Division." Dr. Chen nodded, as if she'd suspected as much. "Combat? Front lines?" Forward operating bases, wherever soldiers were getting hurt. And you came back and became a nurse. I came back and tried to figure out how to use what I'd learned to help people without anyone shooting at me while I did it. Dr. Chen smiled. How's that working out for you? Rachel laughed, the first genuine laugh she'd had since walking out of Desert Valley. Apparently not so well. Rachel, can I ask you something? Why didn't you mention your military background when you applied at Desert Valley? It would have been a selling point. Rachel stared into her coffee cup, watching the cream swirl in lazy patterns. Because I wanted to be hired as a nurse, not as a curiosity. I didn't want to be the former combat medic who everyone expected, to have PTSD or anger issues, or who couldn't handle civilian medicine. I just wanted to take care of patients. And that's exactly what you did yesterday. That's exactly what got me fired yesterday. Dr. Chen was quiet for a moment, then reached into her purse and pulled out a business card. There's something you should know about Marcus Johnson. After you left, he made some phone calls. Apparently, he wasn't just any Marine, he was a staff sergeant, and he still has connections with his old unit. Rachel looked at the business card. It was plain white with just a name and phone number. What kind of connections? The kind that don't forget when someone takes care of one of their own. Dr. Chen stood up, leaving money on the table for both their coffees. Rachel, I think you should stay close to your phone today. Something tells me this story isn't over. After Dr. Chen left, Rachel sat alone in the cafe, turning the business card over in her fingers. She thought about Marcus lying in a hospital bed, making phone calls to people from his past. She thought about the invisible network of loyalty that existed among military personnel, the bonds forged in combat that time and distance couldn't break. But mostly, she thought about how surreal it felt to have her two worlds, her past as a combat medic and her present as a civilian nurse, suddenly colliding in ways she hadn't anticipated. Her phone buzzed with a text message from Tyler. How's the job hunt going? Remember, you're awesome and any hospital would be lucky to have you. Rachel smiled, typing back. Working on it. Love you too. She drove home through the midday. Phoenix traffic, the desert sun beating down on her windshield, the familiar landscape of strip malls and palm trees blurring past. She'd lived in Arizona for 3 years now, but sometimes it still felt foreign compared to the green hills of North Carolina where she'd grown up, or the stark mountains of Afghanistan where she'd spent so much of her 20s. At home, she tried to focus on practical matters, updating her resume, researching potential employers, calculating how long their savings would last if she didn't find work quickly. But her mind kept drifting back to Dr. Chen's words, to the business card sitting on her kitchen table, to the idea that Marcus Johnson was making phone calls to his old unit. The afternoon passed slowly. Rachel managed to submit applications to 3 different hospitals, each one requiring her to explain her termination from Desert Valley in carefully worded terms that made it sound like a philosophical difference rather than insubordination. She was crafting her 4th cover letter when her phone rang. The number was local but unfamiliar. Hello? Ms. Martinez? This is Lieutenant Colonel James Morrison, United States Marine Corps. I believe you know Staff Sergeant Marcus Johnson. Rachel's hand tightened on the phone. A lieutenant colonel was serious business, high-ranking enough to command real authority, senior enough to have connections throughout the military hierarchy. Yes, sir. Is Marcus all right? Staff Sergeant Johnson is recovering well, thanks to your intervention. Miss Martinez, I understand you served as a combat medic with the 82nd Airborne. Yes, sir. 3 tours in Afghanistan. Then you understand the bonds that exist between service members, particularly those who have served in combat together. Rachel wasn't sure where this conversation was heading, but something in the lieutenant colonel's tone made her stand straighter, her military bearing automatically asserting itself. Yes, sir, I do. Staff Sergeant Johnson has told me what happened at Desert Valley Medical Center yesterday. He's also told me about the way you treated him, not just medically, but with the respect and dignity befitting a United States Marine who served his country with honor. Sir Marcus deserved nothing less. Agreed. Miss Martinez, I'm calling to inform you that Staff Sergeant Johnson's story has been shared with his former unit, 2nd Battalion, 8th Marines. They're interested in meeting the medic who took care of their brother. Rachel felt something cold settle in her stomach. Sir, I'm not sure I understand. You will, Ms. Martinez. You will. I suggest you stay close to Desert Valley Medical Center tomorrow morning, around 0800 hours. The line went dead, leaving Rachel staring at her phone with a mixture of confusion and growing apprehension. A lieutenant colonel didn't make personal phone calls to former medics without a reason. Marines didn't get interested in meeting people without a purpose. She thought about calling the number back, demanding an explanation, but her military training told her that whatever was planned for tomorrow morning would happen regardless of whether she understood it ahead of time. The Marines had their own way of handling things, their own code of loyalty and justice. That evening, Tyler came home from school full of energy and stories about his day, chattering about a chemistry test and plans for the weekend. Rachel tried to focus on his words, to maintain the normalcy he needed, but part of her mind was already at Desert Valley, wondering what 8 o'clock tomorrow morning would bring. "Mom, you're not listening," Tyler said, pausing in his description of football practice. "Sorry, sweetheart, I'm just distracted." Tyler studied her face with the perceptive eyes of a teenager who'd learned to read his mother's moods. "This is about more than just losing your job, isn't it?" Rachel met his gaze, seeing echoes of herself in his steady determination. "Maybe. I'm not sure yet. Want to talk about it?" "Not yet. But Tyler?" She reached across the table and touched his hand. "Whatever happens tomorrow, I want you to know that I'm proud of the young man you've become. And I want you to remember that sometimes doing the right thing has consequences we can't predict." Tyler's expression grew more serious. "Mom, you're starting to worry me." "Don't worry. Just remember what I said." That night, Rachel lay in bed staring at the ceiling, her mind cycling through possibilities. She thought about Marcus, recovering in his hospital bed, making phone calls that were apparently rippling outward through networks of loyalty she'd forgotten existed. She thought about Lieutenant Colonel Morrison's words about Marines being interested in meeting her, but mostly she thought about the choice she'd made in that trauma bay, the moment when she decided that doing what was right mattered more than keeping what was safe. She'd thought the consequences of that choice were behind her. The job lost, the financial uncertainty, the need to rebuild her professional life. Now, as the Phoenix night settled around her small apartment, she began to suspect that the consequences were just beginning. Rachel arrived at Desert Valley Medical Center at 7:45 the next morning, her hands gripping the steering wheel as she pulled into the visitor parking lot. She'd barely slept, her mind churning with questions about Lieutenant Colonel Morrison's cryptic phone call and what exactly she was supposed to witness at 8 o'clock. The Arizona sun was already climbing toward what promised to be another scorching day, casting long shadows across the hospital's concrete facade. She sat in her car for a few minutes, watching the usual morning routine of the hospital coming to life. Nurses arriving for day shift, doctors walking briskly through the main entrance, ambulances pulling up to the emergency bay. Everything looked normal, unchanged from the hundreds of mornings she'd made this same drive as an employee rather than an observer. At 7:58, Rachel got out of her car and walked toward the main entrance, still uncertain about what she was supposed to see or do. She dressed professionally in dark slacks and a blue blouse, some instinct telling her that whatever was about to happen required her to look dignified and prepared. The first sign that something was different came as she approached the hospital's front doors. Dr. Harrison was standing just inside the main lobby, his usual pristine white coat replaced by a dark suit. He was speaking in low, urgent tones to two other administrators Rachel recognized but had never spoken to directly. Their body language suggested tension, the kind of controlled anxiety that came with unexpected situations requiring careful handling. Through the glass doors, Rachel could see that the lobby was unusually crowded for a Tuesday morning. Hospital staff clustered in small groups, their conversations animated but hushed. Security guards stood at attention near the information desk, their radios crackling with periodic updates. The atmosphere felt charged, expectant, like the moments before a thunderstorm when the air itself seems to vibrate with approaching energy. At exactly 8 o'clock, Rachel heard them before she saw them. The sound was unmistakable to anyone who'd spent time around military personnel, the synchronized rhythm of boots on pavement moving in perfect formation. It started as a distant rumble, growing steadily louder as it approached the hospital. Rachel turned toward the street and felt her breath catch in her throat. Coming up the main road toward Desert Valley Medical Center was a convoy unlike anything Phoenix had seen in years. Military vehicles stretched in a precise line. Humvees, transport trucks, and command vehicles, all painted in desert camouflage and flying American flags that snapped in the morning breeze. But it wasn't just the vehicles that made the sight extraordinary. It was the people. Marching alongside the convoy in dress blue uniforms that gleamed in the desert sun were Marines. Not a handful, not a ceremonial honor guard, but what appeared to be an entire battalion. They moved with the precision that only comes from years of training and shared purpose, their formation so tight and coordinated that they seemed to move as a single organism. Rachel counted the ranks as they approached, 40, 60, 80 Marines, all marching in perfect step toward the hospital where she'd lost her job for treating one of their own. The sound of their boots created a rhythm that seemed to pulse through the ground itself, a heartbeat of military precision and purpose that made every person within hearing distance stop what they were doing and stare. The convoy came to a halt in the hospital's circular drive, the lead vehicle stopping directly in front of the main entrance. The Marines continued their approach, spreading out into formation across the hospital's front plaza with movements so coordinated they looked choreographed. As they took their positions, Rachel realized they were forming a large semicircle facing the main entrance, with the hospital at their back and the street in front of them. From the lead Humvee stepped a man who could only be Lieutenant Colonel Morrison. He was tall and lean, with silver-gray hair and the bearing of someone accustomed to command. His dress blue uniform was immaculate, decorated with ribbons and insignia that spoke of decades of distinguished service. He moved with the confident stride of an officer who knew exactly what he was doing and why he was doing it. Behind Morrison came other officers, their ranks visible on their uniforms. Majors, captains, lieutenants, all wearing the dress blues. That signified this wasn't a routine military exercise, but something far more formal and significant. But it was the enlisted Marines who filled out the formation that made Rachel's heart race with recognition and memory. These weren't fresh recruits or ceremonial guards. These were combat veterans, their faces bearing the weathered look of men who'd seen action in distant places. Some were young, barely out of their teens, while others showed the grey temples and steady eyes of career military personnel. What they all shared was an unmistakable sense of purpose, a collective determination that radiated from their formation, like heat from pavement. As the Marines settled into their positions, hospital staff and patients began gathering at windows and doorways, drawn by the unprecedented sight unfolding in their parking lot. Rachel could see Dr. Harrison and his administrators pressed against the lobby windows, their expressions ranging from confusion to growing alarm as they tried to understand what was happening and why. Lieutenant Colonel Morrison stepped forward. From the formation, his voice carrying clearly across the plaza as he spoke. Staff Sergeant Marcus Johnson served with honor and distinction in Afghanistan, completing 2 tours of duty with 2nd Battalion, 8th Marines. 2 days ago, he was denied medical treatment at this facility despite being injured and in need of immediate care. Morrison's words carried the weight of formal military bearing, each syllable pronounced with the clarity of someone accustomed to being heard and obeyed. Staff Sergeant Johnson's life was saved by the intervention of a former Army combat medic who chose to provide treatment despite being ordered not to do so by hospital administration. That medic was subsequently terminated from her position for the act of treating a United States Marine with the dignity and medical care he deserved. Rachel felt the blood drain from her face as she realized Morrison was talking about her, describing her actions to this assembled battalion of Marines. She looked around nervously, suddenly aware that she was standing alone near the hospital entrance, while 80 Marines were arranged in formation, apparently on her behalf. The Marine Corps does not forget those who serve, and we do not abandon those who serve us, Morrison continued, his voice carrying across the plaza and echoing off the hospital's concrete walls. Rachel Martinez, former Army medic, demonstrated the values of honor, courage, and commitment when she placed the welfare of a Marine above her own professional security. As Morrison spoke her name, Rachel felt every pair of eyes in the formation turn toward her. The collective gaze of 80 Marines was unlike anything she'd experienced, even in combat. It was a weight of attention, respect, and solidarity that made her feel simultaneously humbled and overwhelmed. Morrison gestured toward her, and Rachel found herself walking forward as if drawn by an invisible force. Her legs felt unsteady, her heart pounding as she approached the Marine formation. She could see faces now, individual Marines looking at her with expressions of respect and gratitude that took her breath away. "Ms. Martinez," Morrison said as she approached, "these Marines represent 2nd Battalion, 8th Marines, Staff Sergeant Johnson's unit. They've traveled from Camp Lejeune to honor the medic who saved their brother's life." Rachel stared at Morrison, then at the assembled Marines, struggling to process what she was seeing. "Sir, I don't understand. This is just for treating Marcus." A voice called out from the formation, a young Marine, perhaps 25, with sergeant stripes on his uniform. "Ma'am, Staff Sergeant Johnson called us. Told us what you did, how you risked your job to take care of him when this hospital turned him away." Another voice joined in, this one from an older Marine with Master Sergeant insignia. "Ma'am, we've all heard about medics who went above and beyond in Afghanistan. We know what it means when someone puts themselves at risk to take care of Marines." More voices began adding their thoughts, creating a chorus of appreciation and respect that made Rachel's eyes well with tears. These weren't speeches or formal statements. These were personal testimonials from Marines who understood exactly what her choice had meant. "Ma'am, my medic saved my life in Helmand Province," called out a Marine with corporal stripes. "Risked his own safety to get to me when I was wounded. What you did for Staff Sergeant Johnson, that's the same spirit." "Marines don't leave Marines behind," added another voice. "And we don't forget the people who take care of Marines when they need it most." Rachel felt overwhelmed by the collective weight of their gratitude, but also confused about the scale of their response. "This is incredible, but I still don't understand why you're all here." Lieutenant Colonel Morrison stepped closer, his expression serious but kind. "Miss Martinez, Staff Sergeant Johnson wasn't just any Marine. He was awarded the Silver Star for gallantry in action during his 2nd deployment. He led a rescue mission that saved 12 Marines who were pinned down by enemy fire. Those Marines went on to save other Marines, who went on to serve with honor in subsequent deployments." Morrison paused, letting the significance of his words sink in. The ripple effect of one Marine's heroism touches dozens, sometimes hundreds, of other service members. When someone saves a Marine like Staff Sergeant Johnson, they're not just saving one life, they're preserving all the lives that Marine will touch in the future. Rachel began to understand the deeper meaning behind the battalion's presence. This wasn't just about her treating Marcus in the emergency room. This was about the military's understanding of interconnectedness, the way one act of courage or compassion could echo through an entire community of service members. "Ma'am," called out another Marine, this one with lieutenant's bars on his uniform. "Staff Sergeant Johnson mentored half the young Marines in our unit. He's the kind of leader who makes everyone around him better. When you saved his life, you saved a piece of all of us." The formation began to shift, Marines stepping forward one by one to share brief stories about Marcus Johnson's impact on their lives and service. Rachel listened in amazement as a picture emerged of a man who dedicated his post-combat military career to training and mentoring younger Marines, sharing the hard-won wisdom of combat experience to help others survive and excel. A young Marine, barely old enough to shave, stepped forward with tears in his eyes. "Ma'am, Staff Sergeant Johnson taught me how to lead Marines in my first deployment to Syria. The tactics he showed me kept my whole squad alive when we got ambushed. He saved my life by training me properly, and I've used what he taught me to keep other Marines safe." An older Marine with gunnery sergeant stripes added his voice. "Staff Sergeant Johnson has been running combat leadership courses for 5 years now. Every Marine who's been through his program goes into deployment better prepared, more confident, more likely to bring their people home alive." As Rachel listened to story after story, she began to understand that Marcus Johnson wasn't just a homeless veteran who'd needed medical care. He was a cornerstone of Marine leadership development, a man whose influence extended through networks of training, mentorship, and shared experience that touched hundreds of current and former Marines. "How many Marines has he trained?" Rachel asked Morrison quietly. "Over 300 in the past 5 years, Morrison replied. "And those Marines have gone on to lead others, to apply his teachings in combat situations, to pass on his wisdom to the next generation. Ms. Martinez, when you chose to treat Staff Sergeant Johnson despite the personal cost, you preserved a legacy of Marine leadership that continues to save lives today." The weight of this revelation hit Rachel like a physical force. She'd thought she was simply treating an injured veteran, doing what any compassionate medical professional would do. She hadn't realized she was preserving a vital piece of military heritage, protecting someone whose continued existence had implications far beyond one man's health and well-being. "Where is Marcus now?" she asked. "Recovering well," Morrison replied. "The surgery was successful, and he's expected to make a full recovery. He wanted to be here today, but his doctors insisted he remain hospitalized for at least another week." Morrison reached into his jacket and pulled out an envelope. "He asked me to give you this." Rachel opened the envelope with trembling hands. Inside was a handwritten note on hospital stationery. "Ms. Martinez, I will never be able to repay what you did for me. But I want you to know that because of your courage, I'll be able to continue training Marines who will serve their country with honor. You didn't just save my life, you saved all the lives I'll help protect in the years to come. Semper Fi, Staff Sergeant Marcus Johnson." As Rachel finished reading, she looked up to see that the Marines had moved from their formation into a new arrangement. They now stood in precise rows, facing the hospital, their collective attention focused on the main entrance, where Dr. Harrison and his administrators were still watching through the glass doors. Lieutenant Colonel Morrison straightened his uniform and walked toward the hospital entrance, his bearing commanding and official. The automatic doors opened as he approached, and Rachel could see Dr. Harrison step forward to meet him, his face pale, with the realization that this military presence was directly related to the incident that had occurred 2 days earlier. Rachel couldn't hear the conversation that followed, but she could see Morrison speaking with calm authority, while Dr. Harrison's expression grew increasingly uncomfortable. The other administrators clustered behind him, their body language suggesting they were beginning to understand that their decision to fire Rachel Martinez had attracted the attention of the United States Marine Corps. After several minutes of discussion, Morrison returned to the formation, his expression satisfied. He walked directly to Rachel, stopping in front of her with military precision. "Ms. Martinez," he said formally, "the hospital administration has been informed that the Marine Corps considers your termination to be an unfortunate misunderstanding. They have been strongly encouraged to reconsider their personnel decisions, particularly as they relate to the treatment of United States veterans." Rachel stared at him, hardly able to process what he was suggesting. "Sir, are you saying..." "No. I'm saying that Desert Valley Medical Center has been reminded of their obligations to provide appropriate care to all patients, including veterans, and to support medical personnel who uphold those obligations." Morrison's smile was slight but unmistakable. "I believe you may be receiving a phone call from Dr. Harrison very soon." As if summoned by Morrison's words, Rachel's phone began to ring. The caller ID showed Desert Valley Medical Center's main number. She looked at Morrison, who nodded encouragingly, then answered the call. "Ms. Martinez, this is Dr. Harrison. I wonder if you might be available to come in for a meeting this afternoon to discuss your employment status." Rachel looked at the battalion of Marines standing in formation around her, at Lieutenant Colonel Morrison watching with approval, at the hospital where she'd lost her job for doing what she believed was right. "I think I might be available for that conversation, Dr. Harrison." "Excellent. Shall we say 2 o'clock?" 2 o'clock works fine." As Rachel ended the call, the Marines began to move back toward their vehicles with the same precision they'd displayed in arriving. But before they dispersed, something extraordinary happened. One by one, they approached Rachel, each Marine offering a brief handshake, a word of thanks, or a simple nod of respect. The young Marine who'd spoken first stopped in front of her, extending his hand. "Ma'am, thank you for taking care of our brother. Marines take care of Marines, but you proved that the best people take care of everyone who needs it." The Master Sergeant was next, his handshake firm and his eyes serious. "Ma'am, you've got the heart of a warrior and the soul of a healer. That's a rare combination, and we're honored to know you." One by one, 80 Marines paid their respects to Rachel Martinez, each interaction brief but meaningful, each handshake carrying the weight of shared understanding about service, sacrifice, and the bonds that unite people who dedicate their lives to caring for others. As the last Marine shook her hand and returned to the convoy, Rachel stood alone in the hospital parking lot, watching as the vehicles prepared to depart. Lieutenant Colonel Morrison approached for a final word. "Ms. Martinez, the Marine Corps doesn't involve itself in civilian employment disputes lightly. But when someone demonstrates the kind of courage and integrity you showed in that emergency room, we take notice. You honored the values we hold dear, and we wanted to ensure that honor was returned. Sir, I just did my job. No, Ms. Martinez, you did far more than your job. You stood up for what was right when it would have been easier to look away. That's not just professional excellence, that's moral courage. And moral courage is what separates good medical professionals from great ones." Morrison saluted her then, a formal military salute that Rachel instinctively returned, her muscle memory from years of army service taking over. Around them, the remaining Marines snapped to attention, creating a moment of ceremony that felt both spontaneous and deeply significant. As the convoy pulled away from Desert Valley Medical Center, Rachel watched the vehicles disappear down the street, taking with them the most extraordinary morning of her civilian life. She thought about Marcus Johnson, recovering in his hospital bed, probably watching the news coverage that was undoubtedly already spreading across Phoenix. She thought about Tyler, who would come home from school to learn that his mother's act of compassion had somehow summoned an entire battalion of Marines to her defense. But mostly, she thought about the choice she'd made in that trauma bay, the split-second decision to treat a patient despite knowing it would cost her job. She thought that choice was about one moment, one patient, one act of medical care. Now she understood it was about something much larger, about the networks of loyalty and gratitude that connect people across time and distance, about the way one act of courage can ripple outward in ways impossible to predict or measure. As she walked back toward her car, Rachel's phone rang again. This time, the caller ID showed Dr. Chen's number. "Rachel, I'm watching the news coverage from the hospital. Are you okay?" Rachel looked back at Desert Valley Medical Center, where she could see hospital staff still clustered at windows, trying to understand what they'd just witnessed. In a few hours, she'd be walking back through those doors for a conversation with Dr. Harrison that was likely to be very different from their last encounter. "Dr. Chen," she said, smiling for the first time in days, "I think I'm better than okay. I think I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." Rachel arrived at Desert Valley Medical Center at exactly 2 o'clock that afternoon, her hands steadier than they'd been in days. The parking lot looked normal again, no trace of the extraordinary military presence that had transformed the hospital's front plaza just hours earlier. But something fundamental had shifted, and she could feel it in the way the security guards nodded respectfully as she passed, in the curious but admiring glances from staff members she recognized. The main lobby buzzed with an energy that was distinctly different from the usual hospital atmosphere. Small clusters of employees stood talking in hushed, excited tones, their conversations clearly focused on the morning's unprecedented events. Rachel caught fragments as she walked toward the administrative offices. Never seen anything like it. 80 Marines made the national news. Dr. Harrison's secretary, a middle-aged woman named Patricia, whom Rachel had always found pleasant but professional, looked up as she approached the reception desk. For the first time in the 3 years Rachel had worked at Desert Valley, Patricia smiled at her with genuine warmth. "Ms. Martinez, Dr. Harrison is ready to see you. And Ms. Martinez—" Patricia lowered her voice conspiratorially. "I want you to know that what you did for that veteran was remarkable. My nephew served in Iraq, and I know how hard it can be for them when they come home." Rachel felt a flush of gratitude for the unexpected support. "Thank you, Patricia. That means a lot." Dr. Harrison's office was a study in corporate medical administration, diplomas and certifications covering one wall, a large desk with precisely arranged papers and windows overlooking the parking lot where the Marine convoy had assembled. Just hours earlier, Dr. Harrison stood as Rachel entered, his usual air of supreme confidence notably absent. "Rachel, please sit down." His use of her first name was jarring. In 3 years of employment, he'd always maintained formal address. "I want to begin by acknowledging that yesterday's events were handled poorly by this administration." Rachel took the offered chair, studying Dr. Harrison's face. The man who had terminated her with such cold efficiency just 2 days earlier now looked uncomfortable, uncertain, like someone navigating unfamiliar territory without a map. "Dr. Harrison, I treated a patient who needed medical care. I stand by that decision, and you should." Dr. Harrison moved around his desk to sit across from her, abandoning the power position behind his imposing furniture. "Rachel, I've spent the morning reviewing hospital policies regarding veteran care, emergency treatment protocols, and our obligations under federal guidelines for patient care regardless of payment status." He paused, pulling out a thick folder filled with documents. It appears that our enforcement of payment verification procedures may have been overly restrictive, particularly as they apply to emergency medical situations. Rachel recognized corporate speak when she heard it, but she also detected something else in Dr. Harrison's tone, genuine discomfort with the position he'd taken 2 days earlier. Are you saying the hospital was wrong to deny Marcus treatment? I'm saying that our policies need clarification and our staff needs better training on when those policies should be applied with flexibility. Dr. Harrison opened the folder, revealing what appeared to be revised policy documents. More importantly, I'm saying that terminating an employee for providing emergency medical care to a patient in need was a hasty decision that didn't reflect the hospital's true values. The conversation felt surreal to Rachel. This was the same man who had threatened to have security physically remove her from the premises, who had fired her with such finality that she'd spent 2 days mourning the death of her career. Now he was speaking in the careful, measured tones of someone who'd been forced to reconsider fundamental assumptions. Dr. Harrison, what exactly are you offering? Your job back, effective immediately. Full reinstatement with no disciplinary record, retroactive pay for the time you've been suspended, and a formal letter of commendation for your file recognizing your dedication to patient care. Rachel sat back in her chair, letting the offer sink in. It was everything she could have hoped for and more. Complete vindication, financial security restored, her professional reputation not just intact, but enhanced. But something in Dr. Harrison's demeanor suggested there was more to this conversation than a simple job offer. There's something else, isn't there? Dr. Harrison nodded, his expression growing more serious. Rachel, your military background never appeared in your employment file. During our conversation with Lieutenant Colonel Morrison this morning, we learned about your service as a combat medic in Afghanistan. I didn't think it was relevant to my qualifications as a nurse. On the contrary, it's extremely relevant. Desert Valley serves a significant veteran population, and we've been struggling to provide the kind of specialized care that many of our veteran patients need. Dr. Harrison leaned forward, his tone becoming more animated. We'd like to offer you a position developing and leading a new veteran care program here at the hospital. The offer caught Rachel completely off guard. She'd expected at best to get her old job back, to return to the familiar routine of emergency department nursing. Instead, Dr. Harrison was proposing something entirely new, a chance to create programs specifically designed to serve the veteran community. What kind of program? Comprehensive veteran care services, mental health support, specialized treatment protocols for combat-related injuries, assistance navigating VA benefits, connections to community resources. Dr. Harrison pulled out another set of documents. We want someone who understands veteran culture, someone who can build trust with patients who might be suspicious of traditional medical institutions. Rachel thought about Marcus, about the way he'd initially resisted seeking treatment, about the pride and wariness she'd seen in his eyes. She thought about other veterans she'd encountered over the years, men and women who carried invisible wounds alongside their physical injuries, who often felt disconnected from civilian medical care. This would be a new position, department head level. With your own budget and staff, you'd have the authority to develop protocols, hire personnel, and create partnerships with veteran organizations throughout Phoenix. Dr. Harrison's enthusiasm seemed genuine now, as if the idea of the program had captured his imagination. Rachel, what happened yesterday showed us that we've been failing our veteran patients. We want to do better. The irony wasn't lost on Rachel that her termination for treating a veteran had led to an offer to head an entire veteran care program. But as she considered the proposal, she realized it represented more than just career advancement. It was an opportunity to bridge her military past and her civilian present in ways she'd never imagined possible. "I'd want to visit with Marcus before making any decisions," she said, "and I'd need to understand exactly what authority I'd have to make real changes." "Of course. In fact, Lieutenant Colonel Morrison mentioned that Staff Sergeant Johnson specifically requested to speak with you about the program concept. And as for authority, you'd report directly to me with full autonomy over program development and implementation." Dr. Harrison stood, extending his hand across the desk. "Rachel, I want to be clear about something. This morning's events opened our eyes to things we should have seen long ago. You didn't just save Staff Sergeant Johnson's life, you showed us what it means to put patient care above institutional convenience." Rachel shook his hand, still processing the magnitude of what was being offered. "Dr. Harrison, I need some time to think about this." "Take all the time you need. Your nursing position is waiting for you, regardless of whether you decide to take on the veteran program." "But Rachel," Dr. Harrison walked her to the door, "I hope you'll consider it. After what I witnessed today, I believe you could create something truly special here." As Rachel left the administrative offices, she found herself walking through the hospital with entirely new eyes. She noticed things she'd missed before: the veteran walking with a cane who seemed to avoid eye contact with staff, the older man in a wheelchair whose military bearing was unmistakable even in civilian clothes, the young woman whose nervous energy and hypervigilance suggested combat experience. How many veterans passed through these halls feeling alienated, misunderstood, or unwelcome? How many left without receiving the full care they needed because they didn't trust civilian medical professionals to understand their experiences? Her phone buzzed with a text from Tyler. "Mom, I just saw the news coverage at school. Are you famous now? Also, can I tell people my mom made the Marines come to Phoenix?" Rachel smiled, typing back, "Not famous, just grateful. And yes, you can. We'll tell people about the Marines. Love you." Another text came through immediately. "Does this mean you got your job back?" "Better than that. I'll tell you everything when I get home." Rachel made her way to Marcus's room on the 4th floor, following the directions Dr. Chen had given her. The medical wing was quieter than the emergency department, filled with the hushed sounds of recovery and healing. She found Marcus in a private room, sitting up in bed and looking significantly better than when she'd last seen him in the trauma bay. His face lit up when she knocked on the doorframe. "Ms. Martinez, I was hoping you'd come by. Please, call me Rachel. How are you feeling?" "Like I got run over by a truck, but Dr. Chen says I'm healing well." Marcus gestured to the chair beside his bed. "Rachel, I need to apologize for what happened yesterday. I never intended for you to lose your job over helping me." Rachel sat down, studying his face. The man who had seemed so defeated and worn down in the emergency department now showed glimpses of the Marine leader that Lieutenant Colonel Morrison had described. "Marcus, you have nothing to apologize for. I made my choice, and I'm proud of it. Still, when I called my old unit, I didn't expect them to mobilize half the East Coast." Marcus grinned, a flash of the personality that had made him an effective mentor to younger Marines. Though I have to admit, seeing Harrison's face when Morrison walked into that lobby was pretty satisfying. "You saw it. Dr. Chen wheeled me to the window so I could watch, said it was therapeutic." Marcus grew more serious. "Rachel, Lieutenant Colonel Morrison told you about the training program I run? He mentioned that you've trained hundreds of Marines over the years. What he might not have explained is why that program exists." Marcus shifted in his bed, wincing slightly as his injured ribs protested the movement. "When I came back from my second deployment, I was a mess. PTSD, survivor's guilt, the whole package. Lost my apartment, lost my job, ended up on the streets for 8 months. Rachel listened quietly, recognizing the all-too-familiar story of veteran transition struggles. The thing that saved me wasn't the VA counseling or the medications, though those helped. It was other veterans, Marines who'd been through similar experiences, who understood what I was dealing with, who didn't try to fix me, but just helped me fix myself. Marcus looked out the window, where the afternoon sun was casting long shadows across the hospital courtyard. When I got stable again, I realized that's what was missing from most veteran support programs. They were run by well-meaning civilians who couldn't really understand what we'd been through. So I started working with Marine leadership to develop training programs that were veteran-led, veteran-focused. And it worked. Better than anyone expected. We reduced post-deployment mental health incidents by 30% in units that went through our programs. Marines who completed our training were more likely to seek help when they needed it, more likely to successfully transition to civilian life, more likely to maintain connections with their support networks. Rachel began to see where the conversation was heading. You think something similar could work in a hospital setting? I know it could work. Marcus turned back to her, his eyes bright with enthusiasm despite his physical condition. Rachel, do you know how many veterans avoid medical care because they don't trust civilian hospitals to understand their needs? I've seen some of that reluctance. It's not just reluctance, it's learned helplessness. Too many of us have had experiences where civilian medical professionals either treated us like damaged goods or couldn't understand why a routine procedure might trigger anxiety related to combat trauma. Marcus leaned forward. But you're different. You moved like military medical personnel. You talked to me like a person instead of a problem, and you understood instinctively how to approach someone with military background. Rachel thought about her interaction with Marcus in the emergency department, how her combat medic training had automatically informed her approach to his care. It didn't feel different to me. It felt like taking care of a patient. Exactly. That's what's been missing from veteran care. Medical professionals who see veterans as patients first, problems second. Marcus pulled out a tablet from his bedside table. Rachel, I've been working on a proposal for veteran-focused medical care ever since I woke up from surgery. Dr. Harrison asked me to share it with you. The tablet displayed a detailed outline for a comprehensive veteran care program that went far beyond anything Rachel had imagined. It included specialized intake procedures designed to reduce anxiety for veterans with PTSD, staff training on military culture and combat trauma, partnerships with veteran service organizations, and peer support programs led by veterans themselves. This is incredibly detailed, Rachel said, scrolling through pages of research, statistics, and implementation strategies. I've had a lot of time to think about it, especially after what happened to me here the other night. Marcus smiled ruefully. Rachel, you didn't just save my life when you treated me. You showed me that there are still people in civilian medicine who understand what service means. Rachel read through more of the proposal, impressed by the depth of thought and research Marcus had put into the concept. You've really thought this through. I've lived this through. Every aspect of this program addresses real problems that I've either experienced myself or seen other veterans struggle with. Marcus grew more animated as he talked. But Rachel, the key to making this work isn't just good policies and procedures. It's having the right person leading it, someone who has credibility with both the veteran community and the medical establishment. Someone like you? Someone like you. Marcus met her eyes directly. Rachel, I'm good at training Marines and developing programs, but you're the one who can make this work in a hospital setting. You have the medical credentials, the military background, and most importantly, the moral courage to do what's right, even when it's difficult. Rachel set down the tablet, feeling the weight of the opportunity that was taking shape around her. It wasn't just a job offer anymore. It was a chance to create something meaningful, to bridge two worlds that too often remain separate despite their shared commitment to service. Marcus, this is a big decision. It would mean leaving emergency nursing, taking on administrative responsibilities, building something from scratch. It would also mean ensuring that veterans like me don't get turned away from medical care because they can't pay or because staff don't understand their needs. Marcus's voice carried the conviction of someone who'd seen too many fellow veterans fall through systemic cracks. Rachel, you have a chance to create something that could be a model for hospitals across the country. A knock on the door interrupted their conversation. Dr. Chen entered, followed by a woman Rachel didn't recognize, tall, professional, wearing a business suit that suggested civilian authority. Rachel, I'd like you to meet Sarah Thompson from the Phoenix Veterans Affairs Office, Dr. Chen said. She heard about this morning's events and wanted to discuss potential partnerships for the Veteran Care Program. Sarah Thompson stepped forward with a warm smile and firm handshake. Ms. Martinez, your actions this week have created quite a stir in the veteran advocacy community. When we heard about the proposed program here at Desert Valley, we knew we wanted to be involved. What kind of involvement? Funding, primarily. The VA has discretionary grants available for innovative veteran care programs, especially those that address gaps in existing services. Sarah pulled out her own folder of documents, based on what Dr. Harrison and Staff Sergeant Johnson have described. This program could qualify for significant federal support. Rachel looked around the room, at Marcus, whose eyes were bright with hope and determination, at Dr. Chen, who was nodding encouragingly, at Sarah Thompson, who represented resources and support she hadn't known existed. The conversation had moved beyond personal career decisions into something that could have impact far beyond Desert Valley Medical Center. What would federal support mean, practically speaking? Startup funding for the first 3 years, training, resources, access to VA databases for veteran identification and outreach, and most importantly, a pathway to replication in other hospital systems. Sarah's enthusiasm was infectious. Ms. Martinez, if this program succeeds here, it could become a template for veteran care nationwide. Marcus leaned forward from his hospital bed. Rachel, remember what Lieutenant Colonel Morrison said about ripple effects? This is exactly what he was talking about. One act of courage, spreading outward in ways you never could have predicted. Dr. Chen added her voice to the conversation. Rachel, I've seen you work with veteran patients before. You have an instinct for it, a way of connecting that goes beyond standard medical training. This program needs someone who can lead with both heart and competence. The room fell quiet as everyone waited for Rachel's response. She thought about Tyler, about the stability and security she'd fought so hard to build for both of them. She thought about the comfortable familiarity of emergency nursing, the routine she'd mastered over years of practice. She thought about the risks of taking on something completely new, something that would require her to step outside her comfort zone and embrace responsibilities she'd never imagined. But mostly, she thought about Marcus, lying broken and ignored in the emergency department 2 nights earlier, and about all the other veterans who might find themselves in similar situations. She thought about the Marines who had traveled across the country to honor her choice to provide care, and about the networks of loyalty and gratitude that connected people who understood what service truly meant. I have one condition, Rachel said finally. Everyone in the room leaned forward expectantly. Marcus has to be involved in developing and running the program. This can't just be about medical professionals deciding what's best for veterans. It has to be veteran-led and veteran-informed at every level. Marcus's face broke into a wide grin. Rachel, are you offering me a job? I'm offering you a chance to turn your training expertise into something that can help veterans in a completely different way. Rachel stood up, feeling a sense of purpose that she hadn't experienced since her days as a combat medic. But yes, if you're interested, I think we make a good team. Sarah Thompson was already reaching for her phone. I need to call my supervisor. This is exactly the kind of innovative partnership the VA has been looking for. Dr. Chen stepped forward and shook Rachel's hand. Welcome to your new career, Rachel. I think you're going to change a lot of lives. As the meeting broke up and the various participants began making phone calls and planning next steps, Rachel found herself alone with Marcus for a few minutes. The enormity of what she'd just agreed to was beginning to sink in, along with the realization that her life was about to change in ways she couldn't fully comprehend. Marcus, are you sure about this? We're basically promising to build something that's never been tried before. Marcus looked at her with the steady confidence of someone who'd faced much bigger challenges in much more dangerous places. Rachel, 2 days ago I was a homeless veteran being turned away from medical care. Today, I'm lying in a hospital bed talking about creating a program that could help thousands of veterans across the country. If that's not proof that impossible things can happen when the right people make the right choices, I don't know what is. Rachel smiled, feeling a lightness in her chest that she hadn't experienced in years. I guess we're really doing this. We're really doing this, Marcus agreed. And Rachel, thank you, not just for saving my life, but for giving me a chance to turn what happened to me into something that can help other people. As Rachel left the hospital that afternoon, she reflected on the extraordinary journey of the past 3 days. She'd lost her job for making what she believed was a morally necessary choice. That choice had attracted the attention of the Marine Corps, leading to one of the most remarkable demonstrations of military solidarity she'd ever witnessed. And now, that same choice was opening doors to opportunities she'd never imagined. Chances to serve the veteran community in ways that combined her medical training with her military background. Her phone buzzed with a text from Tyler. "Mom, whatever happened at the hospital today, you look different. Happier. Can't wait to hear about it." Rachel typed back, "Big changes coming, sweetheart. Good changes. See you at home." As she drove through the Phoenix traffic toward her apartment, Rachel thought about the ripple effects that Lieutenant Colonel Morrison had described. One choice in a trauma bay had led to a battalion of Marines standing in solidarity, which had led to job reinstatement and new opportunities, which was now leading to the creation of something that could help veterans across the country. She thought about the interconnectedness of service, the way people who dedicated their lives to helping others formed networks of mutual support that transcended institutional boundaries. She thought about Marcus, transforming a personal crisis into an opportunity to serve his fellow veterans in a completely new way. But mostly, she thought about Tyler, and about the example she wanted to set for her son, about courage, integrity, and the importance of standing up for what's right, even when the consequences are uncertain. Tomorrow, she'd tell him about the job offer, about the veteran care program, about the chance to turn her military experience into something that could make a real difference in civilian life. Tonight, she'd simply enjoy the feeling of being exactly where she was supposed to be, doing exactly what she was meant to do. 6 months later, Rachel Martinez stood in the entrance of the newly opened Veterans Care Center at Desert Valley Medical Center, watching as the morning sun streamed through windows that bore etched glass emblems of all 5 military branches. The space that had once been an underutilized conference area had been transformed into something unprecedented, a medical facility designed from the ground up to serve those who had served their country. The waiting area looked nothing like a traditional hospital space. comfortable seating arranged in small clusters rather than institutional rows, walls decorated with respectful military artwork, and soft lighting that avoided the harsh fluorescence that could trigger anxiety in veterans with PTSD. A coffee station in one corner was staffed by a volunteer who happened to be a retired Navy chief, offering both refreshments and immediate peer connection for incoming patients. Rachel checked her watch. 7:30 in the morning, 30 minutes before the center's official opening time, but she'd arrived early as had become her habit. The quiet hours before the day began allowed her to walk through the space, ensuring everything was ready, but more importantly, giving her time to reflect on the journey that had brought them to this point. The Veterans Care Center represented more than just expanded services at Desert Valley Medical Center. It had become a model that was being studied and replicated by hospitals across 3 states, with federal funding supporting similar programs in 12 other cities. What had started as Rachel's impulsive decision to treat Marcus Johnson had evolved into a movement that was changing how medical institutions approached veteran care nationwide. Marcus emerged from the office space at the back of the center, a steaming cup of coffee in his hands and a satisfied expression on his face. His recovery had been complete and remarkable, not just physically, but professionally and personally. His title was now Director of Veterans Services, a position that allowed him to combine his military leadership experience with his passion for helping fellow veterans navigate civilian medical care. "Morning, Rachel," Marcus said, settling into one of the comfortable chairs that faced the main entrance. "Ready for the big day?" Today marked the center's 6-month anniversary, and they were expecting a visit from Congresswoman Patricia Williams, who chaired the House Subcommittee on Veterans Affairs. The visit wasn't just ceremonial. Williams was considering legislation that would provide federal funding for veteran care programs based on the Desert Valley model. "Ready as we'll ever be," Rachel replied, though she felt the familiar flutter of nerves that came with high-stakes presentations. "Dr. Chen finished compiling the statistics last night. The numbers are even better than we'd hoped." The statistics were indeed remarkable. In 6 months, the Veterans Care Center had served over 800 veteran patients, with satisfaction scores averaging 4, 8 out of 5. More significantly, the center had achieved a 95% treatment completion rate for veteran patients, compared to the hospital's previous 67% rate for the same population. Veterans were not only receiving care, they were following through with recommended treatments, attending follow-up appointments, and actively engaging with their health care in ways that had been rare before the center's establishment. Tyler appeared in the center's entrance, backpack slung over his shoulder, clearly on his way to school, but stopping by as he did most mornings. At 17 now, he'd grown into his father's height, but retained his mother's determined spirit. The past 6 months had been transformative for him as well, watching his mother build something meaningful from what had initially seemed like professional disaster. "How's the speech coming, Mom?" Tyler asked, giving Rachel a quick hug before nodding respectfully to Marcus, who had become something of a mentor figure in their lives. "I've practiced it so many times I could probably give it in my sleep," Rachel admitted. "But I'm still nervous about representing the program to someone who could influence its future across the country." Tyler grinned with the confidence of a teenager who'd watched his mother accomplish the impossible. "Mom, you convinced a hospital to completely change how they treat veterans. You've gotten federal funding for a program that didn't exist 7 months ago, and you've had Marines calling you to thank you for taking care of their buddies. I think you can handle one Congresswoman." Marcus laughed, the sound rich with appreciation for Tyler's perspective. "Kid's got a point, Rachel. Besides, you're not representing the program alone today. We're all in this together." As Tyler headed off to school, Rachel reflected on how Much her relationship with her son had deepened since the creation of the Veterans Care Center. He'd watched her navigate the challenges of building something from scratch, had seen her work late nights and weekend hours, had been present for both the frustrations and the victories. Through it all, he'd developed a mature understanding of what it meant to turn personal values into professional action. The first veteran patients began arriving at 8 o'clock, and Rachel made her rounds through the center, checking in with staff and patients alike. The culture they'd created was distinctly different from traditional medical environments. More relaxed, more respectful, more attuned to the specific needs and concerns of people who'd served in military environments. In one examination room, Dr. Chen was conducting a follow-up appointment with a young woman who'd served 3 tours in Iraq. The patient's comfort level was obvious. She was laughing at something Dr. Chen had said, a stark contrast to the tense, guarded demeanor Rachel remembered from the woman's first visit 3 months earlier. In another area, Marcus was facilitating a group session for veterans dealing with chronic pain, a condition that often came with both physical and emotional components that required specialized understanding. The participants sat in a circle, sharing strategies and experiences with the kind of openness that only came from talking with people who truly understood their challenges. Rachel paused outside the group room, listening to fragments of conversation that illustrated exactly why the center's approach was so effective. These weren't patients being talked to by medical professionals. These were fellow veterans sharing wisdom and support while receiving expert medical guidance. The combination was powerful and unique. At 10 o'clock, Congresswoman Williams arrived. With a small entourage that included her chief of staff, a veteran affairs liaison, and a photographer to document the visit. Williams was a woman in her 50s with silver hair and the kind of presence that commanded attention without demanding it. More importantly, she was herself a veteran, having served as an army officer before entering politics. "Ms. Martinez," Williams said, extending her hand with a firm grip, "I've been looking forward to this visit ever since I read about your program in the VA newsletter. What you've accomplished here is exactly the kind of innovation we need to see replicated nationwide." Rachel felt the weight of the moment, not just for herself, but for Marcus, for the staff they'd assembled, for the hundreds of veterans who'd already benefited from the center's services, and for the thousands more who could benefit if the program expanded successfully. "Congresswoman Williams, welcome to the Veterans Care Center. We're honored to show you what we've built here." The tour began in the main waiting area, where Williams immediately noticed the thoughtful design choices that differentiated the space from traditional medical environments. Marcus explained the reasoning behind each element, the lighting choices that reduced anxiety, the seating arrangements that allowed veterans to maintain awareness of exits and entrances, the volunteer staffing that provided immediate peer connection. This attention to detail tells me you understand veteran culture at a fundamental level, Williams observed. Too many well-intentioned programs fail because they're designed by people who don't really understand the population they're trying to serve. They moved through the examination rooms, where Williams met with several veteran patients who volunteered to share their experiences. The stories were powerful and consistent. Veterans who had avoided medical care for years were now actively engaged with their health. Veterans who had struggled with civilian medical environments now felt understood and respected. Veterans who had fallen through cracks in other systems were receiving comprehensive, coordinated care. In the administrative area, Rachel presented the statistical outcomes that demonstrated the center's success, not just in patient satisfaction, but in measurable health improvements and cost-effectiveness. The data showed that veterans who received care through the center were less likely to require emergency interventions, more likely to manage chronic conditions effectively, and significantly more likely to maintain long-term relationships with healthcare providers. These numbers are extraordinary, Williams said, reviewing the presentation materials. But what I'm most impressed by is the sustainability model you've developed. This isn't just good medicine, it's smart economics. Marcus stepped forward to explain the financial structure they'd created, which combined federal grants, hospital investment, and partnerships with veteran service organizations to create a program that could operate efficiently while providing enhanced services. The model was designed to be scalable and adaptable to different hospital systems and geographic regions. Congresswoman, what makes this program unique isn't just the services we provide, but the way we provide them, Marcus said. Every aspect of the center is veteran-informed and veteran-led. That's what makes the difference between good intentions and actual effectiveness. Williams spent nearly an hour in the group therapy area, observing Marcus facilitate a session and speaking privately with several participants. Rachel watched the Congresswoman's expression grow increasingly thoughtful as she witnessed the level of trust and openness that existed between the veterans and the staff. After the formal tour, Williams requested a private meeting with Rachel and Marcus in the center's small conference room. The space was deliberately modest. A round table that encouraged equality rather than hierarchy, walls decorated with thank you letters from veteran patients and their families, and windows that looked out on the hospital's healing garden. "I want to be direct with both of you," Williams began. "What you've created here represents the most promising innovation in veteran healthcare that I've encountered in my 8 years on the Veterans Affairs Committee." Rachel felt her heart rate increase, sensing that this conversation was moving toward something significant. Williams continued, "I'm prepared to introduce legislation that would establish federal funding for veteran care centers based on your model. The bill would provide startup grants for hospitals that want to implement similar programs, along with ongoing support for training and development." Marcus leaned forward, his expression intense with interest. "What kind of scope are we talking about, Congresswoman?" "Initial funding for 50 hospitals across 25 states, with the goal of expanding to 200 hospitals within 5 years. Williams paused, letting the magnitude of her proposal sink in. "But I need to know that you're both committed to supporting this expansion. The success of the legislation will depend on having experienced leaders who can guide implementation and training." Rachel looked at Marcus, seeing in his expression the same mixture of excitement and responsibility that she felt. They'd built something successful at Desert Valley, but scaling it to a national level would require them to step into roles they'd never imagined when they started this journey. "Congresswoman, what would that look like practically?" Rachel asked. "You'd both be appointed as senior advisors to the federal program, with responsibility for developing training protocols, overseeing implementation, and ensuring quality standards across participating hospitals." Williams opened her briefcase and pulled out a thick document. "This is a preliminary outline of the legislation. I'd like you to review it and provide feedback before I formally introduce it next month." Marcus reached for the document, his hand steady despite the magnitude of what was being proposed. "Congresswoman, 6 months ago I was a homeless veteran being turned away from medical care. The idea that I might help create a national program for veteran health care still feels surreal." Williams smiled, and for the first time during the visit, her official demeanor softened into something more personal. "Staff Sergeant Johnson, that's exactly why you're the right person for this role. You understand both the need and the solution from personal experience. That credibility can't be manufactured or learned. It has to be lived." She turned to Rachel. "And Ms. Martinez, you've demonstrated something rare in healthcare administration, the ability to turn moral courage into systemic change. That's The kind of leadership this program needs to succeed on a national scale. The meeting concluded with commitments on both sides. Williams would finalize the legislation with input from Rachel and Marcus, while they would begin developing the training and implementation protocols that would be needed to support national expansion. As the Congresswoman and her entourage departed, Rachel and Marcus stood together in the center's main area, trying to process the enormity of what had just been proposed. "Marcus," Rachel said quietly, "when you made those phone calls from your hospital bed 6 months ago, did you ever imagine it would lead to this?" Marcus shook his head, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Rachel, when I was lying in that emergency department thinking I was going to die because nobody would treat me, I never imagined any of this. The center, the program, the opportunity to help veterans across the country, none of it seemed possible." They were interrupted by the arrival of Dr. Chen, who had been monitoring the visit from a distance and was clearly eager to hear about the private meeting with Williams. Behind her came several of the center's staff members, their expressions hopeful and curious. "Well?" Dr. Chen asked. "How did it go?" Rachel looked around at the faces of people who had committed themselves to the vision of the Veterans Care Center. Medical professionals who had embraced a new way of providing care. Administrative staff who had learned to navigate veteran culture. Volunteers who donated their time because they believed in the mission. All of them deserved to know that their work was about to expand far beyond what any of them had initially imagined. "Dr. Chen, it looks like we're going to need to start training other hospitals how to do what we've done here," Rachel said, her voice carrying a mixture of pride and anticipation. The reaction was immediate and jubilant. Applause, excited questions, and a collective sense of accomplishment that filled the center with energy. As the staff dispersed to continue their work with veteran patients, Rachel found herself alone for a few minutes in the space she'd helped create. She walked slowly through the center, visiting each area and remembering the challenges they'd overcome to bring the vision to reality. The funding battles, the policy negotiations, the staff training, the constant refinement of procedures based on patient feedback. All of it had been driven by the memory of Marcus Johnson lying ignored in an emergency department and her decision to provide care regardless of the consequences. Her phone buzzed with a text from Tyler. "How did it go with the Congresswoman? Dad would be proud of what you've built, Mom." The message caught Rachel off guard with its emotional impact. Tyler rarely mentioned his father, who had died in a training accident when Tyler was 12. But his words carried a truth that resonated deeply. She had built something that honored the values she'd learned in military service while serving people who needed advocacy and understanding. She typed back, "It went better than we could have hoped. Big things ahead for the program. Can't wait to tell you about it tonight." As the afternoon progressed, Rachel made her rounds through the center, observing the routine that had become second nature over the past 6 months. Veterans receiving medical care in an environment designed to respect their service and understand their needs. Staff members who had been trained to recognize the unique challenges that could affect veteran patients. Administrative processes that prioritized dignity and efficiency over bureaucratic convenience. But what struck her most was the atmosphere of the place, the sense of community and mutual respect that permeated every interaction. Veterans weren't just receiving medical care. They were participating in a community that valued their service and understood their experiences. It was exactly what Marcus had envisioned in his proposal 6 months earlier, and exactly what Rachel had hoped to create when she'd accepted the challenge of building something from scratch. At 5 o'clock, as the center prepared to close for the day, Marcus approached Rachel with a thoughtful expression. "Rachel, can I ask you something?" "Of course. Do you ever think about that night in the emergency department? About the choice you made that started all of this?" Rachel considered the question, thinking back to the moment when she'd decided to treat Marcus despite Dr. Harrison's threats. It felt simultaneously like yesterday and like a lifetime ago. So much had changed, so much had grown from that single decision. "I think about it often," she said, "not with regret, but with amazement at how one choice can ripple outward in ways you never could have predicted." Marcus nodded. "I think about it too, not just because it saved my life, but because it proved something I'd almost stopped believing, that there are still people who will do what's right, even when it costs them something." Marcus, what we've built here, what we're going to build, nationally, it's not just about that one choice. It's about all the choices that followed. Your choice to turn your experience into a program, the staff's choice to embrace a new way of providing care, the administration's choice to support something innovative. But it started with your choice, Rachel. Everything else followed from that moment when you decided that treating a patient mattered more than following rules. As they prepared to leave the center for the day, Rachel reflected on the journey that had brought them to this point. The program that would soon expand nationally hadn't emerged from strategic planning or institutional initiative. It had grown from a single act of compassion, nurtured by people who understood that serving others was both a privilege and a responsibility. Walking through the parking lot toward her car, Rachel thought about the legislation that Congresswoman Williams would introduce, about the hospitals that would implement veteran care programs based on their model, about the thousands of veterans who would receive better medical care because of what had started in a Desert Valley emergency department 6 months ago. Her phone rang as she reached her car. The caller ID showed Lieutenant Colonel Morrison's number. She'd spoken with him periodically over the past 6 months, usually when he wanted updates on the program's progress or when other military units wanted to learn about the center's services. "Colonel Morrison, good evening." "Rachel, I just got off the phone with Congresswoman Williams. She filled me in on today's meeting and the proposed legislation." "Sir, it's an incredible opportunity to expand the program nationally." "It's more than that, Rachel. It's validation that what you started in that emergency department represents the kind of change that can make a real difference in veterans' lives." Morrison's voice carried the satisfaction of someone who had seen potential fulfilled. "The Marine Corps is prepared to provide whatever support you need for the national expansion: training assistance, facility consultation, personnel recommendations." "That's very generous, sir." "It's not generosity, Rachel. It's investment in something that honors the commitment we make to take care of our people. What you and Marcus have built proves that civilian institutions can provide veteran care that meets military standards of excellence." After the call ended, Rachel sat in her car for a few minutes, watching the last rays of sunlight paint the hospital walls in shades of gold and amber. In a few hours, she'd go home to Tyler, who would want to hear every detail of the day's events. Tomorrow, she'd begin the process of developing training protocols for a national veteran care program. Next month, she'd travel to Washington to testify in support of legislation that could transform veteran health care across the country. But tonight, she simply wanted to appreciate the quiet satisfaction of having helped create something meaningful, something that honored both her military service and her commitment to healing. The Veterans Care Center represented more than professional achievement. It embodied the belief that people who had served their country deserved medical care that recognized their sacrifice and respected their dignity. As Rachel drove home, through the Phoenix evening, she thought about the ripple effects that Lieutenant Colonel Morrison had described 6 months earlier. One choice in a trauma bay had led to a battalion of Marines demonstrating solidarity, which had led to job reinstatement and new opportunities, which had led to the creation of a veteran care program, which was now leading to national legislation that could help veterans across the country. The interconnectedness of service, the way acts of courage inspired others to act courageously, the possibility that individual choices could create systemic change. All of it had been proven real. Through the journey that started with treating Marcus Johnson and refusing to accept that institutional policies were more important than human need. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, and new chances to prove that doing what's right, even when it's difficult, can lead to outcomes more remarkable than anyone could have imagined. Tonight, Rachel Martinez drove home to her son, carrying the quiet satisfaction of knowing that sometimes, when you stand up for what matters, the world stands up with you. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.